What's cracking, guys? I'm Ian Cameron, and today I'm going to share with you a tutorial on how to cut soda cans in half using a whip. I learned this trick back in 2020 using Adam Winrich's YouTube tutorial video, so make sure you reference that one when checking this out. I'm going to try to include a lot of extra details to help you guys out, and without further ado, let's get to it. So before we begin, I want to give a quick shout out to Adam Winrich for making a tutorial on how to do this trick some years back on his YouTube channel. That's how I learned how to do this trick. And I also want to give a quick shout out to Justin Boreski of Canada Whips for giving me the honor to host another Whip 101 monthly challenge. And also, before we begin, the move that we're going to be using for this trick is our sidearm flick on the forehand side. So before you even try to cut a can with a whip, you're going to want to make sure you have a nice, strong, confident sidearm. So if you feel like you need to strengthen your sidearm, you're going to want to make sure you do some drills to build it up first before you attempt to cut a can with the whip. So the first thing you're going to need for this trick is the right type of whip. So for most folks out there, I'm going to recommend a 6 or 7 foot bullwhip or cow whip. Preferably nylon that has a little bit of weight to it, especially if the whip's shot loaded. The whip doesn't necessarily have to be very heavy, but having a little bit extra weight is going to give the whip more power and make it much easier to cut cleanly through the can than, say, a lightweight whip. So my favorite whip to use for this trick, I use a variety of whips, but my favorite is this 9 foot 16 plat nylon bullwhip made by Torrance Fisher of Sword Guy Builds. Now, I've had folks ask me about using slightly longer whips for this trick. And you can use, say, a 9 foot or a 12 foot or even a 20 foot whip. But of course, the longer whip you have, the more space you're going to need to be able to do this trick. And if you're going to try to do this trick, for example, for performances or on a stage that might not have a lot of space, it could be more helpful to have a slightly shorter whip. 6-7 foot whip with enough weight is totally fine. And one thing that also makes this trick a lot easier is to make what's called a chainsaw popper, which sounds pretty intimidating. Whenever I tell people that and they don't know what it is, they're like, oh, chainsaw popper. So this is just a normal popper, except it's a little bit longer, say 14 to 18 or so inches long, and you tie a knot every inch or so down its length. Now these knots kind of bulk the popper up and act like little BBs to help rip through the can. And having a longer popper makes it easier to connect with the can this way. Now, you can use a normal popper, but again, a chainsaw popper is going to make this trick much easier. Now, quick note, you don't want to make the chainsaw popper, say, 2.5, 3 feet long, or you don't want to have the fray. It can be longer than this at the end, but you don't want to have it crazy long, because that's going to create a lot of drag and make it much harder to cut cleanly through the can. And that brings me to my next point. So we want to make sure that we're hitting with the popper, connecting with the popper to the can to be able to cut it in half. If we're going here, for example, let's say I'm back this way and I'm trying to cut the can in half and I'm hitting it here with the fall. The fall is not moving nowhere near as fast as the popper, so it's not going to have as much velocity or power to be able to cut the can in half. It's probably going to hit the can and knock it right off the table. So we want to make sure we're not connecting with our fall, we're connecting with the popper here. Again, if we're just barely nicking the can like this, it's only going to cut it right here. So we want to make sure that the popper is going past the can so it can rip through the can. It can wrap around the can and rip all the way through it. So again, that's why chainsaw popper is very useful for that. Now, again, that brings me to the 2 core principles of this trick. So first off, we want to have the correct distance, so we're hitting with the popper here. And the second most important thing is we want to put the crack right on our target. So physicists actually did a slow motion video, and they were surprised to learn that when the whip cracks, it doesn't actually roll out and crack right there at the end. It actually rolls out down the thong all the way to the fall, and then when it hits the popper, it actually cracks here and then flies forward. So to give a good visual of why that's important for this trick, if you're aiming right here where the popper connects with the can or the center of the can, then the popper is going to crack here and right here, and then right here it's going to lose its velocity. So the crack will happen here, hit the can on the follow through when it loses that speed and power. So if you're aiming with your right hand, you want to aim to the left side of the can because you're going from here to here. So now the crack initiates right here, and right as it's hitting the can, it'll give it enough speed and power to rip through the can. So if you're using your right hand, you want to aim, I literally imagine a little dot like right here on the left side of the can. And if you're using your left hand, you want to imagine right here in the center of the can, right on the right side, just like that. So now with those two core principles in mind, we're going to learn how to line ourselves up for this trick. So the easiest way I found for me personally is to roll my whip all the way out this way and just walk myself back. Now I'm going to walk myself back until the popper, the end of the popper is about in line with the can. It doesn't have to be 100% exact, but right about here, the end of my popper is about in line with the can or just barely past it. So there's a couple ways you can do this to line yourself up, but one thing that helps me is I'm going to lean on my left leg here and I'm going to step my right foot back. A good little step. I'm not going to take a ginormous step like this because then I'm going to be outside of range, and I'm not going to take just like a little half step like this, because then when I reach my arm forward, the fall is going to be too close and the fall is going to hit the can, because I have to take into account from here when my arm's down to when I'm actually reaching forward, my arm and the whip are going farther. So walk myself back here, have the end of the popper in line with the can. I take a good 12 or 18 inch step backwards like this. I lean myself forward like this, take another little step back. So for me, I'm right about here. This will take a little bit of experimentation to find the sweet spot for you, depending on the type of whip you're using, how long it is. So now when I'm right here, again, I want to be aiming to the left side of that can. Now you see the little water vapor flying off the end of my popper, and that can be a good little trick. You can get the end of the whip wet so that when you crack it, there's little water vapor so you can see where the whip is cracking. And again, if it's not wet out in the grass, you could just dip the end of the whip in some water, and that'll give you a good visual of where it's cracking. That's one trick that I use to help me learn how to cut beer bottles in half, because they're a little bit harder than soda cans. But anyway, when we're at the right distance here, so for me, one more time, all right, right here. I'm gonna do a couple lineup shots. I'm gonna try to relax, try to make sure I'm not going too far over to my right, not too far to the left, but I wanna make sure I'm going a little bit to my left because I'm using my right hand. And when I'm ready, I just focus on the can. Just like that. So one cool thing that can happen sometimes when you're cutting cans is when you're very precise, you can actually cut right through the can and leave the bottom half still on the table. And this is a trick that was discovered by Jose Granados, and he calls it a perfect cut. And when it happens, it looks pretty cool, especially if you're doing a performance. Once you practice this trick enough and get more confident and consistent at it, and you cut a bunch of soda cans in a single practice, you'll have what I call a soda can graveyard. Just slaying soda cans all over the place. And then you gotta clean it up. There you have it, guys. That's how you cut a soda can in half using a whip. If you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you for your time, and keep on cracking.